Imagine Europe in 1241. The cathedrals of France still echoed with the chants of monks. The castles of Germany stood tall and proud. And in Poland, peasants tilled the fields, believing their stone walls and ironclad knights would protect them forever. But on the horizon, a storm was coming. A storm unlike anything Europe had ever faced. The Mongols, ruthless, unstoppable, a force that had already swept across Asia like wildfire. And now they were here. This is the story of the Battle of Liegnitz, the forgotten clash where knights of Christendom made their final stand against the most terrifying army the world had ever seen. It is a story of courage, blood, and betrayal, a battle that, though lost, may have saved the West. The Mongols were not just conquerors. They were executioners of nations. Under the command of Battu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, and the brilliant General Subutai, they had already crushed Russia. Cities like Kiev were reduced to ashes, entire populations slaughtered. In 1241, the Mongols turned their gaze westward. Their strategy was as clever as it was merciless. Subutai planned a double invasion. One army would strike Hungary, the other would march north into Poland. The goal was simple: to divide Christendom, to shatter resistance before Europe even knew what was happening. News of the Mongols spread like wildfire, carried by fleeing refugees. Stories of entire towns burned to the ground, of soldiers impaled on stakes, of children trampled under Mongol horses. To many in Europe, the Mongols weren't human at all. They were demons, horsemen of the apocalypse. And yet, despite the warnings, the kingdoms of Europe were unprepared. They were divided, quarreling over borders, taxes, and religion. The Pope in Rome had called for unity, but old rivalries ran too deep. When the Mongols arrived, Europe would not meet them with one mighty army, but with scattered, desperate forces. In early 1241, the Mongols entered Poland. They moved with terrifying speed. Krakow, the great Polish city, was put to the torch. Villages were wiped out. Those who resisted were cut down without mercy. Those who submitted were forced to march as human shields in front of Mongol cavalry. Their next target was Silesia, in modern-day southwestern Poland. And there stood Henry II, Duke of Silesia, known as Henry the Pious. Henry was no emperor, no king, just a duke. But in the chaos, he was the only one willing to stand against the Mongol horde. Henry was young, only in his early 40s, but deeply religious and brave. He had seen what the Mongols had done to his land, and he swore to stop them. He sent out calls for help across Europe. And slowly, an army began to gather. Knights from Poland, soldiers from Germany, crusading warriors from the Teutonic Order, even a handful of Knights Templar. They came not for riches, but because they knew if the Mongols were not stopped here, their own homes would burn next. But Henry's army was small, perhaps 20,000 men at most, facing a Mongol force nearly equal in size but far more disciplined, far more deadly. In April 1241, the two armies drew near each other. The Mongols, led by the cunning General Baidar, chose the ground carefully. They wanted an open field, where their cavalry could maneuver and trap their enemy. Henry, desperate to protect his people, had no choice but to meet them. On April 9th, near the town of Liegnitz, he led his army onto the field. Priests blessed the soldiers, raising crucifixes in the air. Some knights wore white crosses on their armor, a sign that this was no ordinary war, but a holy defense of Christendom itself. As the sun rose, the banners of Poland and Christendom fluttered in the wind, and across the field, the Mongols stood waiting, silent, disciplined, mounted on small, swift horses. The earth trembled with the sound of hooves. The Battle of Liegnitz was about to begin. The fields near Legnica lay silent at dawn. On one side, Henry the Pious stood among his knights, their armor glinting in the morning light. His banners bore the Eagle of Silesia and the Holy Cross of Christendom. Priests moved through the ranks, blessing the men, reminding them that though they faced death, they fought for all of Europe. On the other side, the Mongols waited. They sat still on their horses, their bows already strung, their faces unreadable behind fur and leather. No war drums thundered, No horns blared. Only silence, the kind that comes before a storm. Henry's men looked across at this strange enemy. They saw no shining armor, no long swords, no heavy lances. Just lean men on small, wiry horses, carrying bows, spears, and curved sabers. To the proud European knights, they looked weak, almost laughable. They had no idea they were staring at the deadliest warriors the world had ever seen. The horns finally sounded. Henry's army advanced, banners high, the ground shaking under the weight of charging knights. The clash was brutal and immediate. Mongol arrows darkened the sky, raining down on the armored knights. The steel plate and chainmail turned many aside, but the arrows pierced through horses, unprotected faces, and gaps in armor. Still, the knights pressed forward. When they met the Mongols head-on, the impact was terrifying. European lances shattered against Mongol shields, swords clanged, men screamed. The Mongols pulled back, scattering across the field. To Henry's men, it looked like a rout. Victory seemed near, but this was no retreat. It was a trap. The Mongols had perfected a tactic Europe had never seen: the feigned retreat. They made it look as if they were fleeing in panic, their formation broken. Henry's cavalry, seeing their enemy collapse, gave chase. Knights spurred their horses, eager for glory, desperate to break the Mongols once and for all. But they had fallen into the snare. The Mongols turned suddenly, wheeling their horses with perfect discipline. From the flanks and rear, fresh Mongol units appeared, unleashing a storm of arrows. The knights, spread out and exhausted from the chase, were surrounded. Their lances were useless against the endless hail of arrows. Horses fell in droves. Knights were dragged from their saddles and cut down with sabers. Back at the main line, confusion reigned. Henry tried to rally his infantry, shouting for discipline, for unity. But the sight of knights fleeing back from the ambush sent panic rippling through the ranks. And then the Mongols unleashed their second weapon: fear. They carried with them smoke bombs made from burning sulfur and pitch. Thick black clouds rolled across the field, choking the Europeans, blinding them. Priests cried out that it was witchcraft, that the Mongols were agents of the devil. Soldiers stumbled, blinded and coughing, while Mongol arrows found their marks in the chaos. Henry's army was breaking. Still, Henry would not yield. He rode through the smoke, rallying what knights he could, gathering them into a wedge formation. With banners high, he led a desperate charge straight into the Mongol center. The clash was thunderous, steel on steel, shield against shield. For a moment, it seemed as if the Europeans might break through. But the Mongols adapted quickly. They split apart, letting the knights plunge deep into their ranks, then closed in from all sides. Henry's men were swallowed whole, fighting in a storm of arrows and sabers. One by one, they fell. Yet Henry fought on, his sword flashing, his armor dented and bloodied. Around him, his knights died to the last man, refusing to flee. It was not just a battle now, it was a massacre. The battlefield was drowning in blood and smoke. Knights lay crushed beneath horses. Arrows jutted from bodies like the quills of a hedgehog, and the cries of the dying echoed across the plain. Henry the Pious refused to flee. His armor was battered, his helmet cracked, his sword slick with blood. With a handful of knights still by his side, he made one last desperate push toward the Mongol commanders. If he could kill their leader, perhaps his men might rally. Perhaps God would grant them victory. The Mongols recognized him. They had studied their enemies well, and Henry's golden eagle banner marked him as the Duke. The horde closed around him like a tightening noose. Henry fought with fury, cutting down Mongol horsemen with sweeping strikes. His knights guarded him fiercely, forming a living shield around their lord. One by one they fell, pierced with arrows, cut down by sabers, trampled beneath hooves. At last, Henry stood almost alone. His horse collapsed beneath him, struck by arrows. He stumbled to his feet, his sword still in his hand, his breath ragged. Surrounded by Mongols, he swung until his strength failed, until the last arrow found its mark. Henry the Pious, Duke of Silesia, fell where he stood, the last defender of Christendom on that bloody field. The battle was over. The European army lay shattered, scattered across the fields near Legnica. The Mongols moved swiftly, hunting down survivors, ensuring no pockets of resistance remained. Thousands were slain where they lay, their bodies stripped of armor and weapons. And then came the final insult. The Mongols beheaded Henry. They mounted his head on a spear and carried it before the walls of Legnica itself. When the defenders saw it, terror gripped the city. Their duke was dead. Their army was gone. Resistance seemed hopeless. But the Mongols did not stay to lay siege. They had no need. Their victory was complete, their message delivered. No one in Europe could stand against them. News of the disaster spread quickly. Across Poland and Germany, panic erupted. Refugees poured westward, bringing tales of fire and slaughter, of demons on horseback who killed without mercy. Kings and princes trembled. Some prepared their castles for siege. Others debated fleeing entirely. But then, just as suddenly as they had come, the Mongols stopped. It was not mercy that spared Western Europe. It was fate. Even as the Mongol armies prepared to march deeper into Germany, a messenger arrived from the east. The great Khan Ogidi, son of Genghis Khan, was dead. By Mongol law, all princes of the blood had to return to Mongolia to elect a new supreme ruler. Bata Khan and Subutai, despite their victories, could not ignore the summons. Reluctantly, the horde turned east. They vanished as swiftly as they had come, leaving behind only burned towns, shattered armies, and haunting memories. On the surface, Legnica was a disaster. Henry was dead. His army was annihilated. The Mongols stood triumphant. Yet, in a strange twist of history, his defeat may have saved Europe. By holding out at Legnica, Henry delayed the Mongols just long enough. His sacrifice and that of his knights bought the time Europe desperately needed. When news of Ogidi's death came, the Mongols withdrew. Without that pause, the horde might have swept into Germany, France, even Italy. Christendom itself might have fallen. And so, though Legnica was a loss, it became something greater. The forgotten battle that saved the Western world. When the smoke of Legnica cleared, the truth was undeniable. Europe had faced the Mongols, and Europe had lost. The knights and soldiers who had once believed themselves invincible lay dead in the fields. Cities trembled at the thought that the horde might return at any moment. But the Mongols never came. Their sudden withdrawal left Europe stunned, unable to understand why an enemy that could not be defeated simply disappeared. Rumors spread. Some said the Pope had cursed them. Others claimed God himself had intervened. Few knew the truth. The death of Ogidi Khan had pulled the horde back east. Henry the Pious was mourned, but his sacrifice was quickly overshadowed by other events. The Mongol retreat meant his death had bought a strange kind of safety. Yet instead of being remembered as Europe's savior, Henry became little more than a local hero in Polish chronicles. For centuries, his stand at Legnica was reduced to a footnote. Kings, emperors, and popes wrote their histories, but the name of Henry the Pious rarely appeared. The memory of the Mongols lingered as a terror, but the battle itself was pushed into the shadows. Historians later debated the what-ifs. What if Ogidi Khan had lived longer? What if the Mongols had pressed forward after Legnica? Germany lay undefended. France was divided. Even Rome could have been threatened. The cathedrals of Europe might have fallen like the temples of Kiev. Western civilization, as we know it, could have ended in fire and blood. Instead, the Mongols turned back. And because of that, Europe endured. Renaissance, Reformation, the rise of nation-states, all of it flowed from a survival that was never guaranteed. And that survival came, in part, from a forgotten battlefield in Poland. Today, the Battle of Liegnitz is remembered in Poland as a symbol of sacrifice. Statues of Henry the Pious stand in towns once threatened by the Mongol Horde. The field itself has become a quiet place of memory, where the bones of thousands still lie beneath the soil. For the wider world, though, the battle remains little known, hidden in the shadow of grander events. Yet its significance is undeniable. It is a reminder that sometimes history turns not on victories, but on defeats. That a single stand, even in failure, can change the fate of nations. So when we ask, what saved the Western world from the Mongols? The answer is not just the death of a Khan far away. It is also the courage of Henry the Pious and the men who fought and died beside him at Legnica. They lost their battle, but in losing, they gave Europe a future. And that is why Legnica, the forgotten battle, remains one of the most haunting turning points in history.